verses 19 through 27 in 1 Corinthians 9, Paul wrote about the method that he used in order to be of the greatest benefit to the Lord and to the others. And there were times when Paul did things that he didn't have to do, but he did them so that his work wouldn't be hindered. And one of the times when he did that was when he had Timothy circumcised. There, Acts 16:3 tells about that. Paul realized that if he didn't do that, then there was going to be more focus on that than what it was on what Paul had to teach them, share with them. So anytime that there was something that was expeditious, Paul would accommodate himself to those prejudices and preferences, but he wouldn't sacrifice the truth or righteousness, and that's the main thing. And and I thought about that because sometimes we'll say, well, I don't have to do that. No, we don't have to. We don't have to do a lot of things, but we do them because it rather than to have a confrontation. And sometimes, the rule that I've tried to use with myself is, does it really matter? If I have to do this, does it really matter? And so I think that he used the Olympic Games also as a lesson, and I really enjoyed that because well, they weren't called the Olympic Games back then, but it was the same thing. That's where they came from. He said that those individuals in those games trained for 10 months. And of course, nowadays with the Olympic athletes, they train, I'm sure, probably year round. But he said they trained for 10 months. They had restrictions in their diets, and the reward that they had was a crown. Now, the last Olympics, I heard at one time what the gold medal cost, and it wasn't a tremendous amount of money, but their reward was a perishable crown. They told me, I read where it was made out of pine needles. I don't know how you make something, or they call it pine leaves. I didn't know pine trees had leaves, but I think they're talking about needles. But the Christian, when we do the work that we're called to do, then we receive an eternal crown. We receive something that's so much better than what they receive. So as we think about these things, I want us to go then into chapter 10, and he says there in 1 Corinthians 10, he said, "Moreover, brethren, I do not want you to be unaware that all our fathers were under the cloud, all passed through the sea, all were baptized into Moses in the cloud and in the sea. All ate the same spiritual food, all drank the same spiritual drink, for they drank of that spiritual rock that followed them, and that rock was Christ. But with most of them God was not well pleased, for their bodies were scattered in the wilderness." And if you go back and read the story about the Exodus, it's so sad to me, but to me it speaks well of the society that we live in here now. They were in a terrible situation there in Egypt. They were slaves. They were mistreated. They were beaten. I don't know what all that they had to endure. But then when they had the opportunity to be released, that it was fine at first. But then they began to complain. They complained because they didn't have any meat. Complained they didn't have, God gave them the manna, gave them meat, gave them quail. Complained because they didn't have water. It was just one thing after another. And it reminds me today, like I say, of our own society, because it doesn't matter what the government does, it's not enough. I read several things this week, and I thought, you people really aren't going to be pleased, because it just seems like that there's always some complaint, something to be unhappy about. I look at my life, and you look at yours, and we may not have everything that we want, but we have everything we need. And it just bothers me that people can't be pleased with what God provides. But then on the other hand, a lot of them don't even recognize God or serve God or do anything for God either. So it kind of works that way. Paul used through God's inspiration a lot of the fleshly, earthly kingdom of Israel, the things that were involved there, and that was a type of the spiritual kingdom. And I thought about that quite a bit the other day. The kingdom, the Israelites, the first thing they wanted, of course, was a king. And so God gave that to them. Didn't work out too well for them. But we have a king. And that's, again, that's something that I think a lot of people, they ignore that. In their society, the king's word was the final word. That's what you did. In our society, if Congress passes some type of a law, or there's some change made in the schools, or whatever, there's always going to be people complaining and refusing to be submissive. It's just a constant thing. And I thought, if you could take any one issue that was, I'm not talking about minor things, something that had some kind of significance or importance. Take any issue that you want. You get, let's say you get 50 people together and they discuss that. You won't find very many people that agree. Always going to be something that someone complains about. And that's what happened with Israel. And God uses this to point out to us some things that we need to really think about. He said that they drank of the spiritual rock that followed them. And of course, we know that Jesus is the water. That's what there at the well when he met the woman, talked about that to her. And so we know that Jesus and God provides all of the things that we need in order to sustain our life. When Paul talks about them being baptized into Moses, a couple of things I want to mention to you. And when you're a member of the Church of Christ, it seems like that everybody knows more about you and about the Bible than what you do. And I don't know if you felt that way, but I have on many occasions. The word baptize is a word that I don't understand. When we're being raised by our parents, I don't know about y'all, but even though I was the perfect child, sometimes my dad would say, "Did you not understand what I said?" Or it wasn't that I didn't understand, it's just that I didn't want to do it. Well, the word baptize, and we all know this, but I still think it's important for us to think about it. It comes from the Greek word baptizo, and that's just a word in their language. It's transliterated into our language as the word baptize. Well, the word literally means to overwhelm or to make fully wet. That's what the word means. And so when I thought about that, and again, I'm not judging someone else, but like I've told you before, when I was there in Israel, we were down the Jordan River, and the Israeli side was where we went. The other side over there was where the most of the Muslims were, and so I was watching the baptizing, because they were baptizing on both sides. I don't remember exactly how they did it on the other side, but on our side, there was a guy that was down there, and he had looked like a shell of some kind, a conch shell or something, and he'd have people go down there, and he's pouring water on their heads. Of course, it wouldn't be proper, and I probably couldn't even understand him or he understand me, but I would like to have asked him, how do you not understand the word? Because that's not how you baptize. And so when Paul is talking about being baptized into Moses, he wasn't talking about just having a little bit of the word from Moses or the laws from Moses. He was talking about being fully immersed in it, doing what Moses taught. Well, it's the same thing for us as Christians. You can't just take and leave, pick and choose what you want to do. And a lot of times we'll do that with a lot of things, and religious people do that, it seems to me, like all of the time. When they left Egypt and had been under Pharaoh's rule, they were immersed into Moses, or should have been, and they should have been following his rules. But it didn't take long. Like I say, they began to complain. They began to gripe. And so whenever we look at the problems that they had, there were over 600,000 men that left Egypt, according to what the historians say. That didn't include the women or the children. So some say that there were between 2 and 3 million people that left Egypt. I can't even imagine that number. So they go through all the wilderness journey, and of course if they had done properly, if they'd done what they should have done, the journey wouldn't have taken nearly so long. But they finally get down to the promised land. Now then, you'd think with all those people and God's provision when they get there, how many do you think that got to go into the promised land? You remember? 2. Think about that. 2 to 3 million people, and you get there, and only 2 get to cross over. Well, of course, in our society today, well, God shouldn't have been so hard on them. They should have been provided for better. We live in an underserved area. All the excuses that you hear from people today. The problem was they couldn't obey the rules. That was it. And so, as I read this, I was doing some studying on some things, and this one person used a word that I never had thought about before. And I don't know if you have or if you've ever used it. It's the word immersion. I didn't say immersion, I said immersion. E-M-E-R-S-I-O-N. And I thought, I never had thought about that word before. This guy, a person, said baptism requires immersion and immersion. And I thought, well, that's probably right. Scriptural baptism requires both of those. Because when they were immersed, they were buried in the water. When they immersed, they were raised to walk in newness of life. And those 2 words describe that action perfectly. And so, again, I thought about this, and I thought, years ago I baptized this older lady. Well, she would be younger than me, but anyway, at the time she was older than me. And I think her and her husband both had some improper motives for wanting to have that done. And so when she came up out of the water, she used a profane word to describe how cold the water was. And one of the guys there in the front row said, "Put her under again, preacher, don't think it took," And I told her, the woman was, they were not well-educated people, and the whole thing was they were wanting some financial help. It'd been better just to ask for it to start with, but they didn't do it that way. So, when I think about the Israelites, they were, Jesus speaks later on in the New Testament. He says that, let's look at John 4 and verse 34 with me. There's so many things, lessons that are in the New Testament that come from the historical events that we know about. So it said in John 4 and 34, he said, "My food is to do the will of him who sent me and to finish his work." And so, and then at one time he talked about how that he was the bread of life. And so the way that the Lord taught, and Paul and the other writers taught, they used things that people were familiar with, physical things, to teach spiritual truths. And I love that way of teaching. There in John 4 and let's see, what was 14, I believe it was. Mm-hmm. Yeah, where they were at the well. And that was what when he told that woman, he said, "Whoever drinks this water will thirst again, but whoever drinks the water that I shall give him will never thirst." And those little truths like that, so many times I think that we all know them, we've heard them over and over again. But if you think about the happiest people that I've ever known in my lifetime were people that were Christians. They were satisfied. There was a little lady that I knew years ago. Her name was Dubby Suggs. And Dubby lived in a little small trailer. It wasn't underpinned or anything like that. It was just a little small trailer on some people's property. And Dubby never complained about anything. Never asked for anything, never wanted anything. I thought about her not long ago, and I don't remember how she got to church. Someone picked her up and brought her to church. She was there every Sunday. She never asked for a thing. I thought about we should have done a better job of providing for people like that than what we did, because we had several like that. But then I think today about us, our children, our people in our country, never satisfied, never satisfied. I'm not going to get into politics, but Donald Trump is doing this tariff thing, and I think probably it's wise. But you know what I've heard again and again? When are we going to get some of that money? Number one, it ain't your money. When it's gone to the government, it's their money. And so I think that the Israelites were so much like that. And he said that we shouldn't lust after things as they did. That word lust, I thought about that a lot. In fact, I've got a lesson I'm working on now that involves that. And I think when we hear that word, we usually translate it into something sexual, something physical like that. But, if you, for example, I would like to have, a different television, say, in my living room, other than the one I've got. I'd like to have a smart TV, whatever that is. Diane's told me about it, but I don't know what it is. I'd like to have one of those. And so if I start focusing on that, and all of my attention goes to that, and I would even do things that I normally wouldn't do in order to be able to get that, it would be lust. It would have that desire, that strong, immense desire. And so Paul tells us that we shouldn't do that. And then back there in 1 Corinthians 10, he says something else in verse 7. And I know this word. Well, in fact, verse 6, he says, now these things became our examples to the intent we should not lust after evil things as they also lusted. And then he says in the next verse, and do not become idolaters, as were some of them. As it is written, the people sat down to eat and drink and rose up to play. Now then, where does the word idolatry come in that place? I was reading some comments on the verses, and this idea or thought came to my mind. Have you ever had someone say to you, "You're crying my patience"? We have, haven't we? Well, really, that's what Paul is basically saying right here. These people were crying the patience of the Lord. Those people, the Israelites, possibly even the people in the church at Corinth, they tried his patience because they wouldn't trust him. They wouldn't believe in him. They provoked him to see just how much he would put up with, just how far they could go. And again, we see this in the religious world. I don't get onto this, talk about this very much, but I'm going to this morning and try to be kind about it. But when you read the New Testament, and unfortunately very few really do read it, if you start in the book of Acts, when the church began, and you look at specifically only what the New Testament teaches about membership in the church, how you become a member of Christ's church, the church itself, the practices of the church, just look at those things. Leave everything else alone. I challenge you to come up with any way of practicing other than what the Church of Christ does. Now, I'm not talking about all of them, because there are churches of Christ today that have digressed and gone different ways. And I'm not saying that our congregation does it perfectly well, because I'm sure there's other things that we could do or things that we don't do. But basically, you would have a worship service like this. And so, I think today I saw the other day where there was a church somewhere that was practicing, they were involved in worship. And I looked at them and I thought, that's not the way the Bible teaches it. And so I think that whenever Paul is writing to these people there in Corinth, I don't know exactly what all was going on with them, but there were things that he was not pleased about. The Corinthians, before they became Christians, they were identified as heathens. and that word always has bothered me. But it basically is I think, someone that doesn't believe and trust in God. And that's the way I feel about it. They follow Greek mythology. They worship multiple gods. And they had a lot of the festivals. And we read about that in the Old Testament. Back whenever Moses went up to the mountain to receive the Ten Commandments, we know that story quite well. He didn't come down as soon as they expected him to, and so, Aaron made the golden calf. But something else took place. And you read about this in Exodus chapter 32. And when I was reading this the other day, I thought how sad that this is, that they would do these things. But Exodus 32. Now, when the people saw that Moses delayed coming down from the mountain, the people gathered together to Aaron and said to him, "Come, make us gods that shall go before us." That's where the idolatry comes in. He says, "For as for this Moses," now this guy they held a high esteem, and now he's just this Moses, "that shall go before us. For as this Moses, the man who brought us up out of the land of Egypt, we do not know what's become of him." Well, I'll tell you what, folks. God can look at a lot of people's lives in this country today and they say, "You don't know where I am, do you?" And he hasn't moved. And so then it goes on and it says, "And I filled him with the Spirit of God and wisdom and understanding and knowledge and all manner of workmanship to design artistic works, to work in gold and silver, bronze, and so on and so forth." But anyway, that's the wrong place. I got to another place. But anyway, what happened, of course, we realized they took their golden earrings, all the stuff that they got when they left the land of Egypt, and it says that, and he fashioned it with an engraving tool and made a molded calf. Now later on, when he gets questioned about this, he tells God or people, "Well, I just took the gold and threw it in the fire, and out came this calf." So the story changes. But the problem was they go on and it says in verse 5, "So when Aaron saw it, he built an altar. Aaron made a proclamation, said, tomorrow is a feast for the Lord. Then he rose early the next day and offered burnt offerings and brought peace offerings. The people sat down to eat and drink and rose up to play." And that's what he's talking about over in 1 Corinthians. And so, it doesn't say that we can't enjoy ourselves and have a party or a dinner together or anything like that, but it implies that those people were doing things that God didn't approve of, and we all understand those things.
Dwayne, could it be that, like in today's world, human race, we're filled with impatience?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
We have such an impatient
Yep.
lifestyle that rather than waiting on Moses,
Good point. Yeah.
they wanted something immediately.
Right.
That's where our technology comes in nowadays, is we want things immediately.
Yep.
We don't have the patience to wait, so instead of waiting on that, buying a new car, we go buy a used car or similar things.
Yeah.
We get impatient instead of waiting for the right opportunity. We rush into decisions based on our desires and not based on our beliefs.
That's an excellent point, Jason. Yeah, I think that's exactly right. We're impatient, and we're impatient. We're never satisfied. We always want to complain. We're never happy. Well, what is the common denominator? You're not following the right source. You're not looking to God. I look at our building and I say, this building is 125 years old. We need to tear it down. We need to build a new building. We need to have a fancy building. We need to have stained glass windows. We need to have 40 bathrooms. All these things. That's the way people think. And God says, "I've given you what I want you to have. Be satisfied." There in Exodus 32, there's another story told about how that the people digressed, and so what we gotta realize when Paul is writing to the church of Corinth, he's just trying to bring their attention to the way things have been, the digression that they've been involved in. And so he says there in that verse that we read a moment ago, nor let us commit sexual immorality, as some of them did. And in one day, 23,000 fell. And we read that story in Numbers 25. And so, you know, it's so important, I think, for us to realize that God gave us all of these examples. It's not a threat. God just says, if you do what I've asked you to do, I'll bless you. If you don't do what I ask you to do, I can't bless you. So if God is not in control of your life, who is? Satan. Do you think Satan's going to bless anybody? No. Jesus already went through that little discussion with him. So in verse 12, he gets down to something else that I want to get to before we run out of time this morning. He says, therefore, let him who thinks he stands take heed lest he fall. Now, you gotta really think about that verse just a little bit. And the way that I interpret the verse is, if you're not trusting in God, you're not standing on solid ground. That's the way I feel about it. You know, I think back years ago, I bought both of the boys new pickups. I didn't pay the whole price for it. I just made the arrangements and got the loan and so on and so forth. And so I said, here you guys, here's good transportation. Well, both of them didn't use good judgment or good wisdom, and so both of them lost their trucks. Well, I think about that. God has given us things, and when he gives us things, we don't get the receipt to pay for it. He already takes care of that. I'm talking about spiritual things. If we need something physical and we ask God for it, God will open doors, but he's not going to pay the bill. And so when these disciples, these Christians here in Corinth, Paul is wanting them to understand, you better not get too confident, overconfident. You better not start trusting. You better not trust in the wrong thing. You better trust in me. And then he makes this statement here in verse 13. And this verse is so misunderstood and so often misapplied. Paul says, no temptation has overtaken you except such as is common to man, but God is faithful, who will not allow you to be tempted beyond what you are able. And with the temptation will also make the way of escape that you may be able to bear it. And I won't get through this verse, I'm sure, today, but I worked with a lady years ago, and her husband was a county commissioner in Young County. Really nice guy. And the girl's grandfather had been the commissioner before, and so that had been in their family for a long time. Well, her husband, he was not a great big guy. He was a little heavier than I am, but he had a heart attack, and he was in bad shape. And so his wife, she was really struggling, and so she came to work one day, and she said, it's really hard. I'm really having a hard time. She said, but I know, you ever heard this before? I know that the Bible says that God won't put more on us than what we can endure. That's what she said. I know the Bible tells me that. And then she wanted to say, but I'm afraid that he has me mixed up with someone else. Well, I had a hard time dealing with that one. And I tried to explain it to her. But so often people will read the scriptures, and then they'll read into the scriptures what they want it to say. And sometimes, and Paul tells us this, you know, that we've got to understand that you got to do some studying and some thinking about these things. Number one, he said, I'll go back and dissect the sentence. No temptation has overtaken you. Now, the word temptation is there. God didn't say, I'm not going to put more on you than what you can stand. He said, no temptation has overtaken you. So in order to be a temptation, there has to be something out there that's drawing our attention away from God. And that comes from the world. And so he's saying, you've never been tempted beyond what you can endure. And what she was saying was that, totally wrong from what God was teaching. The temptations, or some people call them trials, we'll all have to deal with those things. We all have trials. Jason, I've had on my mind all week long that family with that young boy that had the tumor, and you said that I think that found out that it was maybe someone said that last Wednesday. I don't know, but anyway, it was what do they call that?
Hodgkin's lymphoma.
Hodgkin's lymphoma. Okay, that's bad. That's bad. And so, someone could say, would you call that a temptation? No, not a temptation. It's a trial. It's something you have to deal with. And so many times, it's just like with I thought about Margaret and Philip all the time. I mean, all last week. And Margaret was telling Sherry and I, when we saw them down there at the funeral, that their daughter had some physical problems. Margaret has dealt with physical problems, and she tried to get the daughter to go and be checked to see if these genes were there present in her body, as well. Well, the daughter says, no, I don't go, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to go to the doctor. I don't want anybody cutting on me. I'm going to treat myself. And I've thought about that all week long. And spiritually, there are a lot of people that feel the same way. I'll just take care of myself. I don't need you. I'll just take care of myself. Well, that's not a temptation, but it's a trial. And so God's saying to us, when you have a bad thing going on in your life, you're going through a trial, I've got the answer. But then we're tempted to not want to trust in Him, but take care of it herself. This girl, they said that she, used a lot of medicating, whatever you call it. That my mother-in-law was Indian, and so she had a lot of these old Indian medicines and things that she would use, and that's all well and good. But you can't leave God out of it. And that's where our problems come in. One commentator put it like this. He said, these trials show our fitness to enter the kingdom of God. I totally disagree with that. I totally disagree with that. I'm never going to be fit enough to enter the kingdom of God on my own. If I don't have the blood of Jesus covering me, I have no hope. And so I don't know where the commentator came up with that idea. But when Paul talked about running the race and disciplining his body and all that sort of thing, he wanted these people to understand that you've got to let God have control of your life. And so many people never get that. They think, God is there when I need Him, but I'm my own person. I'll take care of my own self. In James chapter 1, 12 through 14, there's a scripture that I hope you'll write it down because it's important. James 1, 12 through 14. James says, "Blessed is the man who endures temptation. For when he has been approved, he will receive the crown of life, which the Lord has promised to those who love Him." Now listen to this. "Let no one say when he's tempted, I'm tempted by God." Don't say that. Don't say that. He said, "For God cannot be tempted by evil, nor does He tempt anyone else." Those are God's words. So when this lady was saying what she was saying, she was misunderstanding. And I wish that I had known more at the time where I could have shown her these verses. And then verse 14 it says, "But each one is tempted," or tried, and listen carefully, "when he's drawn away by his own desires and enticed." There's where the problem comes in. And you know, it's there was a guy, his name was George Lyle. And George was about the size of James. He worked at Leonard Brothers in Fort Worth. He was one of the sweetest, nicest guys I've ever known. And every time that he would come to our congregation, his family were members there, I always asked him to teach, to preach for us. Never turned me down. But before the service, when we were praying, and George at this time was probably in his middle 70s anyway, and the pews were spaced about like ours were, or George got down on his knees. I would do that today, but Tony can tell you it's hard for me to get up sometimes when I get down there like that. But I thought about that. And so what George was saying to God in my mind was, God, you're greater than me. I worship you. I fall down on my knees before you to show you that I want to be humble. I want to be a servant. And so, you know, when I read these words of Paul, I think about those things like that, because James teaches, Paul teaches all the same thing. We need to be humble before the mighty throne of God. Another passage is Psalm 29, verse 11. And David, even though David certainly made many, many mistakes like we all do, David recognized God and his power. And it said in Psalm 29, verse 11, the Lord will give strength to his people. The Lord will bless his people with peace. And so when these trials come, and we all have them, David says God will give you the strength to endure those things. He will help you get through these things. Isaiah 40 is another place that I went to as I was thinking about this. Because, you know, I don't know about you, but my rememberer doesn't work as well as what it used to. And so I have to go and be reminded about what God has told us. Isaiah 40:29. Isaiah said, he gives power to the weak, and to those who have no might he increases strength. Even the youths shall faint and be weary, and the young men shall utterly fall. But those who wait on the Lord, that's the key, those who wait on the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings like eagles. They shall run and not weary. They shall walk and not faint. So God has never told us that I'm not going to test you beyond what you can endure. He's not promised that. What he said is you're not going to be tempted beyond what you have the ability to withstand. And I'm thankful for that promise. So I know I can't make any excuses. If I mess up or I fail, God, I can't say, God, you gave me more than what I can handle. God would say, no, you didn't endure the temptation. I've given you the strength to do that. I've given you the strength to endure those temptations. I'm sure thankful he has. Thank y'all.